What you see of Northbrook today only hints at what existed long ago, although the threads of the past can still be seen. Those threads have been woven by time and human experience into a community with a remarkable story to tell.
The program you're about to watch was created to celebrate the centennial of the village, incorporated as Schermerville in 1901 and renamed Northbrook in 1923. As the decades pass, changes in the community often blend into the background of our busy lives and soon become just another thread of the past. Before we step back into history, it's important to highlight some of the changes that have occurred in Northbrook since this award-winning program was completed in 2001. Images tell the remarkable story of our community and how it has changed from its humble and rural beginnings to the vibrant suburban community it is today. Images also tell how our community honors its past and moves forward preparing for the future. So let's take a look back to see where it all started.
Long before human intervention, the Ice Age was carving a map of Northbrook's future.
Glacial evidence can be seen today. There are 4 moraines. These are ridges of land that were created by glacial debris.
Waukegan Road, for example, sits atop the Deerfield Moraine. It and many other thoroughfares in northern Illinois were defined by the glaciers and first used as trails by the earliest inhabitants of the area. A rich and vibrant Native American culture arose on the open plains and savannas, spreading its dominion over a pristine continent. But by 1833, Potawatomi Indians had ceded the last of their lands in Illinois to the United States. Westward traveling pioneers confronted an environment unlike any they had ever seen.
The original surveyor's notes from 1839 and 1840 indicated that Northbrook was an awful lot of open prairie.
Land fit for farming, good fertile land. So that's what drew a lot of the settlers here, and the fact that they could buy it from the government for $1.25 an acre.
The early settlers soon discovered abundance in the wilderness that became Northfield Township. One of the first permanent white settlers was a man named John Kinsey Clark, who staked his claim in 1835 where the Brookside Shopping Center is today. Clark was not alone for long. Driven by dreams of open land, wave after wave of settlers began pouring into the Illinois Territory.
The first settlers that were coming into this area were Englishmen or people from New England that wanted more space.
3 generations of the Sherman family came west from New York in 1832.
All of what's downtown Northbrook now was all Sherman land. They had about 1,000 acres of land. In 1840, when the first post office was opened, it was called Sherman.
The area was a magnet for people seeking new opportunities, and they came however they could.
One of the things that amazed me is the stories of so many people like John Bach walked all the way here from Pennsylvania.
In the late 1840s, records show the Sherman family began selling off large parcels of their land, mostly to German immigrants like Frederick Schirmer. Fleeing a war-torn land and repressive inheritance laws, German farmers left their native soil to pursue an American dream.
We have letters from my husband's relatives in Germany pleading for information, how to come, what is the best way, please answer quickly.
By 1850, when Northfield Township was officially organized, its citizens were anxious to be in charge of their own destiny.
They wanted a share in making the laws.
As the year 1860 approached, the open prairie and savannas had been tamed and converted into fertile farmland. The names of the pioneers who often risked everything to come to Illinois for a few acres of that good earth are still with us today. In faraway Washington, D.C., Abraham Lincoln was grappling with the issues that would ignite the Civil War.
When the Civil War broke out, Men from this area were very willing to enlist.
By the end of a war that nearly destroyed the nation, township men had enlisted and re-enlisted to serve the duration of the conflict. Local men and boys had put down their plows to pick up a rifle for the Union. Many were German immigrants who fought and died in battle and marched with Sherman to the sea.
Yes, they had come from other countries. Now they were Americans. This was their home.
In 1871, two historic events would change everything. The first was the start of construction of a railroad line that would go through Northfield Township. The second was a catastrophe that would change not just the future of a single city, but the landscape of a nation, the Great Chicago Fire. But with disaster came opportunity. The new city would rise from the ashes of the old, create a new and American architecture. And this time, they were going to use bricks.
The need for bricks and the arrival of the railroad all worked together, that we could make all the bricks, and then we had a convenient way of transporting them down into the city.
Brickmakers added an industrial dimension to what had been an entirely agricultural community. Now the township needed a railroad station.
Mr. Shermer owned the land where the station was to be built. Why not call it Shermer Station? And the area gradually began to be called Shermerville as the town grew around the station.
The age of the railroad was rapidly changing the face of America. Suddenly, all commerce rode the rails.
With the coming of the railroad, more and more people came to the center of the town.
But the culture of the original settlers was still very much alive. Nowhere was this more evident than in the community churches.
About 1892, the people in town decided that they would come together and build a church. They called it the Hope Union Church because it was the hope of the people, a union of the community. It was through your church that you had your fellowship with your neighbors and your friends.
As the 20th century approached, Shermerville was still largely a farm community, a rural township. But some people in the community saw room for improvement, stronger bridges, better roads, and sidewalks for children walking to school. America in 1900 was a nation on the verge of becoming a world power, and cities and towns all around the Midwest faced formidable growing pains. Shermerville was no exception.
The streets were mud. There weren't any sidewalks, and this was very swampy land, so when it rained, there were large puddles.
Making improvements meant collecting money. Incorporating Shermerville was the first step toward governing themselves.
It would raise the taxes for the merchants here in town. Were they going to be able to sell enough merchandise? Were they going to be able to have enough products to make up for the increases in taxes, to build the sidewalks, to improve the streets?
The community was divided. The outcome of the vote would ride on the men who lived in Bachtown, an area of housing for workers across from the brickyards built on John Bach's farm.
In order to incorporate as a village, you had to be under 2 square miles, and you had to have at least 300 people. Well, the farms were so spread apart, there was no way to pull 300 people under 2 miles. So the logical way was to work with the Bachtown people.
The first step was to collect enough signatures on a petition for incorporation.
There were 35 people who signed a petition. 16 of them were brickyard workers, and only 3 of them were downtown merchants.
As Thanksgiving of 1901 approached, residents gathered to vote yes or no on incorporation.
And there were only 69 votes cast, because while there were at least 300 people in town, that included men, women, and children. And at 1900, only the men were allowed to vote.
32 men voted against incorporation.
35 for, 2 spoiled ballots. So it passed by 3 votes.
On November 18, 1901, the village of Shermerville officially came into existence.
Life in Schermerville was very much like any other small town with a predominant German background.
I didn't speak English until I went into grade school. I used to walk uptown to Melzer's and Landwehr's store and get ice cream. That was our big Saturday night. We'd walk uptown and get an ice cream cone. Each Sunday we would go to church in our horse and buggy. We didn't have a car at that time.
Farms still dominated the landscape.
It only went as far as Western Avenue, the town. Beyond that was cornfields. We had to go outside to pump our water. We used to have sidewalks, inter sidewalks, and dirt roads.
In those days of gravel roads, car was a luxury.
Automobiles had made their debut in Schermerville, frightening horses and angering board members who declared the town's speed limit to be 8 miles an hour. Education was a high priority.
In 1910, they built a 4-room brick building, which is still standing. And you had 8 grades, had 3 teachers and a principal.
It was very difficult at that time to go to high school.
They used to have to take the train to Deerfield, and then they'd get on a wagon, and be drawn from the Deerfield station to Highland Park. That's the way they went to school every day.
Schermerville had its first village marshal, whose main duty was to close the saloons on time. Firefighters were all volunteers and relied on horse-drawn wagons and hand pumps tapping inadequate supplies of water. But the community leaders were acting to bring the advantages of the modern world to the village. In 1917, the world came to Schermerville in a very different way. America entered the Great War.
During World War I, some of our men went off to war. Most of the boys came home, and there was a large celebration to welcome the soldiers home.
So we had marching in town, parading and so forth. It was really a gallant day, you know.
The nation and Schermerville now turned their attention to more domestic concerns. And Prohibition, the banning of alcohol, had quite an impact on the community.
There was a lot of drinking that went on.
It wasn't so much the inhabitants of Northbrook proper.
It was
the people who came into the town for the weekend.
Ones that came in from Chicago, and they loved that grove over there.
It's one of the places where, after a night of partying in town, some of the visitors would spend the night in the park.
Most residents were not happy to see the throngs of revelers encamped in their groves. By the time Prohibition put a stop to that unwelcome trend, residents felt that the town needed a new name to help erase an old reputation.
Prohibition changed the face of Schermerville, and suddenly all of these people that had been coming into town weren't here anymore.
The Schermerville Citizens Club was the engine for many of the improvements in the village. Now its members took the lead in changing the image of the town.
People in Schermerville wanted to look to the future again.
Schermerville's reputation was known around for having its saloons and all that.
They wanted to be looked as a new and progressive town, and they were really serious. So the Citizens Club decided to have a contest, and they sent out a notice to people in town to enter names for a possible change for the village.
It came down to 2 choices. One was Oakton. The other was suggested by Ed Landwehr, Northbrook.
He chose that name because it was for the West Fork of the North Branch of Chicago River, and the brook, the river, runs right through the center of town. At the village board meeting in January of 1923, the village board decreed by a 6-to-1 vote that the name of the town would be changed from Schermerville to Northbrook.
I walked out into the kitchen one morning, and my dad said to me, "You don't live in Schermerville anymore." I said to him, "If I don't live in Schermerville, where do I live?" And he said, "You live in Northbrook."
It was the first step in a long series of things that they did to improve their community. After the name change, they got together again and thought, let's have a homecoming. Let's have a celebration for our new community, this new spirit in our town. And so they had what was called Northbrook Day.
Well, it was really a big day. We had a parade. Kids would ride bicycles and so forth. My father built a dance floor, and we used to have everybody come and dance, and they had the best band.
The community came together on Northbrook Days.
Northbrook Days was so popular that what was conceived as a one-time celebration became an eagerly anticipated yearly event. Like the rest of the nation, the 20s were boom times for Northbrook. Village leaders sought to take advantage of the good times and build for the future.
They had already taxed themselves quite heavily to build paved streets. And in the early 1920s, after the name was changed to Northbrook, they had a very large good road celebration here.
Northbrook now had some of the best roads in the state and ambitious plans to build new homes along them.
So not only were they thinking about moving ahead with this vision for a new town, the merchants made their vision come true by replacing all these wooden buildings with something strong and substantial. The Civic building was built by a donation from Civic, became our first village hall, and a very large addition was made to the Northbrook School.
While the downtown was getting a facelift, the Forest Preserve District began buying land and turning it into public parks.
My uncle sold one of the farms to the Forest Preserve in 1926.
Today's Some Woods was purchased from the Warehane family and converted from farmland into forest.
Northbrook probably has more trees today than it did a century and a half ago.
Northbrook's plan for expansion was a work of vision and imagination, and many developers took notice. Within a few short years, 6 golf clubs were built nearby. Wealthy golfers could fly from anywhere in the country and land at Curtis Reynolds Airport or Sky Harbor. Planes raced each other over the skies of this farm town. The age of aviation had come to Northbrook.
I can remember when I was in grade school riding my bike out there, and they had a lot of races. Some famous pilots like Wiley Post was out there.
With all the vision for a new community, things already being done to change the image of our community, everything came to a complete standstill.
They built streets, sidewalks, water mains, and sewers, and then came the Depression, and no homes were built on those streets, so there was a lot of vacant streets in Northbrook.
After 1929, the crash, almost everybody lost their job.
In 1932, when I worked at Phil Johnson's restaurant, we started off, we got $7 a week, and then whatever we made in tips. And if you got a quarter or 50 cents, that was a big deal.
The bank here went out of business, and it was pretty hard times here in town.
Ultimately, Northbrook's salvation was forged from the determination and courage of its citizens.
Most people got by growing their own food. Everybody had a garden.
The merchants in town helped the community because they carried a line of credit.
I think everybody tried to help one another.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Somebody needed extra. If you could help them with it, why, you did.
The New Deal brought some opportunities here to our community. The WPA with Civic planted elm trees all up and down our streets. That's why we have all these beautiful beginnings of the urban forests here. And the CCC took the Skokie Swamp and made it into a recreational area and a flood retention area. And many of our local people were employed.
But getting through the worst economic crisis in the nation's history took more than federal largesse.
Northbrook survived mostly because it was a farming community and because it was a self-sufficient community, neighbors helping neighbors. And the vision that they had planned for the new housing developments and the vacant streets drew someone else into town who had a new vision for our community.
A man by the name of Culligan came to Northbrook. He'd done a little research and found that these streets existed.
Who wanted to dry his zeolite on the streets. And he struck a deal with the village where he paid them to rent the streets.
The good roads of Northbrook had finally found an occupant.
The importance of Culligan during the Depression was to put unemployed brickmakers in Northbrook to work, to give them a job at a living wage.
When World War II arrived on the heels of the Depression, Northbrook citizens again rose to the challenge. Culligan began making silica gel to protect machinery from moisture for the Navy and received the highest honor paid to war production companies, the Army-Navy E for Excellence.
Everybody pitched in. The women got involved. More of them became clerks in stores. Rationing took place. A lot of the things of life were taken for the military.
Post-war prosperity helped complete the evolution from rural outpost to bustling modern suburb. Northbrook's government, schools, churches, and business community continued to grow, while residents struggled to keep it all in balance. Soldiers returning from the war were the first to confront the changing times.
When I come back to Northbrook, it was hard to find a place to live.
But the housing shortage didn't last long. All across America, families were growing, and the so-called baby boom generation was born. Everyone was moving to the suburbs.
The vacant streets that Mr. Culligan rented all had houses built by the early 50s. And then the farms started to be covered with subdivisions and developments and more streets, and just kept growing.
From 1940 to 1950, Northbrook's population rose from 1,200 to over 3,000. The number of incoming families put a strain on public resources.
We wanted a community basically built around residential, but we also realized that in order to preserve that without having to increase the taxes, we had to develop these other areas of commercial and industrial.
To achieve this balance, Northbrook commissioned a study to find the best way to accommodate growth while retaining the village's small town and friendly character. The village also came up with a master street plan that would provide for more orderly growth. One of its lasting legacies was the construction of the Cherry Lane underpass, which united Northbrook's two halves. Traffic downtown often had to come to a complete halt as trains passed.
In case there was a fire on either side of the railroad tracks, there was no way of getting the fire trucks across the tracks.
The Cherry Lane underpass was a very divisive issue.
Some of the people that had houses and property along there were not too happy about it.
A referendum to build it passed with just 56% of the vote.
What's true of Northbrook now was true of Northbrook all during that period and perhaps forever, and that is when there was an issue at hand, there was a lot of discussion.
And a lot of close votes. The bond issue for Northbrook's first public library in 1951 passed by only 6 votes. Meanwhile, federal and state road construction was making Northbrook more accessible to people working in Chicago.
When I first moved here in 1952, we had a community of about 3,800 people. When Eden's Highway opened up, the expansion of the village began, and we quickly grew to about 7,000, 7,500 people.
At the beginning of the 1960s, one of the more pressing needs was to increase the water supply.
We had been purchasing water from Glencoe, and as the community expanded, Glencoe kept increasing the rate. The real problem was, how do we get access to the lake? We were just about ready to give up any idea of that project when literally God intervened.
The pumping station is on property of North Shore Congregation Israel.
And we prevailed upon the Board of Trustees of the congregation to allow us to have access through their property and into the lake.
That was one of the cornerstones of the growth of this community.
Northbrook's epic started with the extension of water from Lake Michigan, which really helped it control its destiny.
But the children of any community are the true measure of its destiny, and the quality of learning its foundation.
I would say the schools have made Northbrook what it is today as a community.
The high school did not occupy a building of its own until 1953.
The community of Northbrook has been very supportive of its schools, quite demanding, in fact, I think, at times. of what we do for the children.
New schools to handle new children became one of the village's primary concerns, and taxpayers were willing to foot the bill.
We got the ideas, and they were quick to fund it, and we just didn't lose referendum. Their money was always there.
Northbrook's stunning rise from a small, underinvested rural school system reached a milestone when local students tested #1 in science and #2 in math in the first-in-the-world consortium.
We are second to none, regardless of which nation you put us against.
A community that had barely enough residents to qualify for incorporation had, within a century, become a village of over 30,000 that provided its citizens with the finest schools and services while preserving the small-town sensibility that had endeared it to generations.
The community's dedication to careful planning has been a phenomenal success, and one which a lot of other communities want to emulate.
With all that growth and expansion, Northbrook has still managed to preserve some of the landscape its original settlers would recognize.
This town has so many blessings. For example, the amount of Cook County forest preserves that run through it. Not every community has that kind of open space.
Even with all the changes that have occurred in the community, you can come to the Village Green Park right here in the center of town on a weekend and feel like you're part of a village, not just any other suburban community in the United States.
The village has taken a mandate from the residents to protect Northbrook's beautiful urban forest.
The village has been recognized as a tree city for the last 6 years, so we've got a big commitment to trees, and we think it does define the character of the community.
Once again, money was forthcoming from taxpayers for the Park District to purchase the Anitsberger property.
When I look at the Anitsberger Park, I see an open space which has a long history of variety of contributions to the fabric of Northbrook.
But the strongest threads of this American tapestry are its people.
It's really the strength of what went before us that gives us the quality of life we have now. And I see this as a thread that carries through even today.
It's a big village now, and they have the wherewithal to buy anything they want or need. But still, the real satisfaction I've found, it comes from working with similar-minded people who are willing to, get their hands dirty and get something done.
Northbrook is now a multicultural, multi-ethnic community. Just like the pioneers, people from diverse backgrounds have in common the dream of a better life.
Northbrook is large enough, small enough to accommodate all kinds of people.
There is a friendliness and a warmth that I wouldn't trade for anything.
Northbrook's story has been America's story.
My great-grandfather coming here in 1855, my grandfather going to the one-room log school, my father having a farm in town. I grew up here. It's been good to me, and I hope I've been good to it.
You can see the dream today on every corner, in every school, riding every train. It's made of 1,000 threads, woven together with nimble fingers. Northbrook is indeed an American tapestry.
Oh, I think those early settlers would be very proud of what they see today. Very proud indeed. And we should be proud of what they started for us, and then also continue our responsibility to make it even better for our children ahead of us.
In the decades since the video was completed, the downtown has undergone subtle changes, with new buildings replacing the old, filling in open spaces and an entire block. The Village Green, with its iconic lion drinking fountain and gazebo, gained 2 new plazas. Centennial Plaza, honoring the village at its 100th birthday, and Memorial Plaza, located between the river and the Northbrook History Museum, honoring the 43 Northbrook men who made the ultimate sacrifice. Culligan, which was synonymous with Northbrook, no longer has a presence in town. However, with an eye to the future, the first Culligan factory, built in 1951, just outside the village limits on Shermer Road and Illinois Road, was purchased by the village in 2018. The site of the last Culligan factory in unincorporated Northbrook is now a mixed-use commercial development annexed to the village of Glenview. Large mixed-use developments have also been built on Skokie Boulevard on either side of Dundee Road and on the Techney lands. These developments have brought senior living facilities, restaurants, businesses, and residents to town. Green Acres Country Club has closed, and the future redevelopment of the huge property will add a new chapter to our community history. A second water tower was added in the Sky Harbor Industrial Park on the site of the former airport with the same name. A new memorial bench overlooks the original water tower, made famous by Northbrook resident John Hughes in his iconic film, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Throughout its history, Northbrook has been a community whose strength is in its people, living side by side, working and playing together in a spirit of peace and harmony. Those who came first built the foundation for a rich and vibrant community, and each successive generation has molded the community to reflect the times and their needs. Like a beautiful patchwork quilt, each resident, organization, event, or era stands alone on its own merit, yet when fused together they form a colorful and rich heritage of which we can all be proud.